Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, hi, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers, here to talk Seahawks football. And we are recording the show because we have been officially eliminated from the 2024-2025 NFL playoffs. And it's kind of a moment where things shift a little bit, at least for us, of course, for the team as well. So it just kind of marks really the end of the season. We were just kind of calculating before we pushed record where Seattle is in its draft scenarios coming up, and determined that this game is essentially meaningless one way or another as far as our draft position. We're pretty much locked in at 18, Keith, right?
Yeah. So the Seahawks have the 18th pick currently as they sit with 9-7. The teams that could catch them, as far as also being 9-7, are Atlanta, which Seattle beat, Miami, which Seattle beat, and Cincinnati, which has a significantly weaker strength of schedule. So Seattle would have the disadvantage in terms of draft order against all three of them. So if any of those teams were to win and Seattle lose, it doesn't matter. They're still going to be 18th, and no one else can catch them. So that's where the Seahawks will stand. And at that point, it really doesn't matter if the Seahawks win this game or lose this game. They will not drop below 18th because anyone that makes the playoffs picks after the people who don't. And so they can't move down and they can't move up. So they might as well go win a game.
Now they can dislodge the Rams, I think, from the 3rd seed and make them the 4th seed.
Yeah. I mean,
which would dictate a challenger, would dictate their opponent and possibly a home game somewhere down the line.
Yeah. I mean, and the other thing that you've got there is to finish with the same record as the team that won the division, right? That's basically saying, hey, look, we're right there. We're on the same page for going into next year. And I think that that's something they want to do. I think they want to be able to say they went 4-2 in the division, not 3-3, because that is showing that they're, one of the top teams in the division, that kind of stuff. I think that this is a game that Seattle wants to win. We can say mathematically in terms of draft and playoffs, it doesn't matter, but I do think it matters personally to the coaches and to the players. So
they lift these type of
play hard.
I do too. I would say this is just a regular game for them as far as the approach, the mentality, and the execution that they would like to see, for sure. It may impact a couple of peripheral players on the roster that you may want to just evaluate. For example, now, if it comes to incentives and contract importance as far as getting a certain amount of plays or a certain percentage of completions, etc., Gino will play. There's, I would say, a 99.8% probability that Gino starts this game and plays at least one half of this game, if not more. I think if the game's out of touch for whatever reason, one way or another, we're up by 25, they're up by 20 in the fourth quarter, Howell gets a little bit of a run, but other than that, I would say Gino gets an opportunity to go out and close out the season on his terms, and because the status is unknown, I think, going into the future. Gino looks like he'll probably be back. Some sort of structured contract change may be on the horizon, but their opportunity for improving that position in the offseason is 50-50 at best, as far as moving on from Gino. And we'll just have to see how that goes, and we'll have plenty of conversation around that. But yeah, as far as like getting Kenny McIntosh some more touches, yes. Getting maybe Pritchett in the secondary a more of a look back there just to see if how he might fit next year would be great. Maybe a Christian Haynes over on the left side at the guard spot instead of Tomlinson for the entire game. Maybe he gets a handful of snaps in this game just so that he can have some experience as well as maybe see how he looks over on the left side there. Because I would think that he would be in the run for competition at either guard spot in the spring. And if he can play on the left side, that would give him an opportunity, I think, to at least expand his uh, opportunity in 2025.
Mhm.
I'm sure there are a few others as well, Keith, that you'd like to see as well. The interesting thing for me, this season, if we were to kind of figure out what went wrong at what time to get us into this spot, and I would say came down to like 3 games really. That Giants game where Seattle loses 29-20. If this roster and the way that they're playing currently were to face that Giants team right now, we would win that game like 95 out of 100 times.
Yeah.
For whatever
I
reason,
mean,
we
that
gave up 420 total yards in that game.
the defense was
Um,
awful.
yeah,
That was one of the worst
and we only
defensive
had 22
performances you'll
minutes of
see.
possession in that game.
I mean,
Uh,
I don't want to say that if this team played that Giants team that they would win, because while the defense I think does a lot, the offense does nothing. Um,
but it
and
did
they're
come in October, at the beginning of October, when the offense was still somewhat decent. I mean, if you go look at that game, Seattle did have some offense in that game. They just didn't
well,
have
yeah.
enough.
I mean, they were playing a bad defense, but they just played one of the worst defenses in the NFL in Chicago and managed 6 points and
No, I know. Oh
could
yeah,
do
yeah,
nothing
yeah.
offensively. So I don't trust Seattle's offense at all at this
But
point.
this also
Um,
came just after that Lions game where they went toe to toe with them for the whole game and scored 30 some odd points. I mean, it's just weird. It was just that's when this was the October 6th game against the Giants. That's when the offense started to just really kind of go off into this
yeah,
unable to really manage red zone opportunities, third down conversions, running the
that was
ball became
the beginning of
completely
the
a
end
challenge.
for
Yeah.
the
Yes.
offense. Because
Yes.
coming off that they won the first three. They went into Detroit and lost a tough game. Um, but they scored 30 some points, and so the offense looked like it was going to be okay, and we were worried about the defense. And
Totally.
then
Totally.
and then that Giants game, the defense was still bad. The
Really bad.
offense started to fall, and then it got worse on both ends. And then the trade happened for Ernest Jones, and the defense suddenly snapped back into being good, and has
Right.
been the highlight of this team, for the last like 7 weeks. And meanwhile, the offense has continued to get worse week in and week out.
Or
And
or at least not better. Yeah.
well, the worst game of the year was last year or last week. So uh, the trend is
Mm,
definitely down with the offense and up with the defense, and so that's
certainly.
where we sit right now. So
Well,
um,
certainly. Yeah. So that game was kind of a dictating factor in as far as the final record was concerned. We should have won that game. That game ended up, I mean, the Giants ended up being what, 3 wins? The Rams game, the first Rams game where Seattle lost 26-20 in overtime. Seattle had 424 offensive yards. This is November 3rd. 424 offensive yards, but Geno Smith ended up with 3 turnovers, three picks in that game, including a pick
mhm.
six. Now he had statistically, a pretty decent game except for the turnovers, and that was the
Except
that
for
was
the
the result.
turnovers. Yeah,
Right. And then the Vikings lost.
you can't accept for the turnovers when for a quarterback.
Right.
It's such a taking care of the football is such a big part of that position, and it's actually been the biggest problem that Geno's had all year.
Yeah.
Is he's been a turnover machine, and um, the
Yeah.
team needed better from him when it comes to that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I mean that is what it is.
It is what it is. And then the Vikings lost 27-24 a couple weeks ago Geno Smith had, again, amazing stats, 314 yards, 3 touchdowns. He was actually 15 for 15, 219 yards and 3 touchdowns on those 3 touchdown drives. But caveat, he threw 2 interceptions. And that was the difference in the game because the defense kind of came in, played their game. It was okay game defensively. Offense came in and did what it needed to do to win, except for the 2 turnovers. The first interception led directly to 3 points for the Vikings. The second interception was that last minute thing that Geno tried to throw to DK Metcalf on the sideline that was intercepted. So those to me were the 3 games that really could have turned the season and did not.
So, we're going to look at this season and Geno's going to be a big topic of conversation, because he is going to be up there in the rankings for like yards and completions and that kind of stuff. But the stats that tell me the story here is 17 touchdowns, 15 picks. Those are not the stats of a good quarterback.
No, yes. But how much does the offensive line contribute to those turnovers? Like, if you were being completely honest, how many times did a big time rush where Geno was getting contacted at the time he released the ball cause a turnover or whatever? Or I'm just saying, was there 3 of those interceptions that were caused directly by pressure that any quarterback in the league would have had, given their circumstances? I'm just saying,
I don't think
maybe
so, because
that was an impact.
When you look at like in the Minnesota game, the one he threw at the end of the game, yeah, there was pressure. There's an unblocked guy in his face. But you and I talked about that play at length. You have to know that DK is not on your list of reads pre-snap because of the way the coverage is. And you throw it out of bounds or you throw it to someone else as a heart read. And like those are the kind of mental mistakes that lead to those kind of interceptions. So yeah, there was an offensive line problem, and you could say, oh well, pressure caused that in a way, but in a way it was a decision-making process, and what should have happened pre snap to tell him what not to do, and that would be to throw it to DK's in DK's direction. And so yeah, I just honestly I look at that and I go, you want to find where part of this season came apart, and it's going to come down to Geno Smith's turnovers, and the fact that it's one thing if you're having 15 picks is bad no matter where you're doing, but I could put up with it if you had 30 touchdowns.
Agreed.
But he didn't. He had 17.
Agreed.
I mean that 1-to-1 ratio is not going to get it done. I mean, you look at
and it would have been this is a kind of a credit to Geno. In almost any other quarterback except for Patrick Mahomes and Allen and a few other select quarterbacks would have done just as bad or worse in this offense, I think. And Geno had a bad year. Geno made some bad decisions, but
in terms of yards,
I'll say that somebody else wouldn't have made too much of a difference.
In terms of yards and completion percentage and that kind of stuff, they might have had a lesser year because Geno played pretty well under pressure. He was always under pressure. But those picks are painful. And that's that's really kind of the story.
Look at Patrick Mahomes is no, Patrick Mahomes had some more touchdowns, but accuracy wise, et cetera, completion percentage, all that kind of stuff, Patrick Mahomes, didn't have statistically as, far different from Geno Smith, on that baseline stuff, and threw a lot of interceptions. But he also scored a ton. So there's your difference you were talking about earlier. Yeah. Now, those that are arguing, well, let's just draft a quarterback or whatever.
You
You put a
candidate
guy like
can't.
you put a guy like Bo Nix or Michael Penix in this offense with this protection and stuff. It would have been a disaster to put a rookie
Okay.
in that offense.
You brought up Mahomes. Uh, his down year, he has 100 fewer yards than Gino, 26 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. That's his down
Right.
year.
At one
Um,
point, like about 5 weeks ago, they were pretty well on par together. Not he was slightly ahead on touchdowns, but Gino's just had finished out the season very poorly. So,
yeah, and Mahomes
um,
has gone 8 touchdowns and 0 picks over the last 5 games.
exactly, exactly.
Um, so yeah, I mean, you have a situation where, like, oh yeah, he's having a down year, and he has um
Well, look
fewer
at the wins. You win in the NFL. I mean, it's just
yeah, he
crazy,
has fewer picks when it matters.
right?
And that's his down year. So granted, okay, we are comparing him to arguably the best quarterback in the NFL. So that's probably not a fair comparison for anybody. But I'm just saying, like, uh, his bad year, he has significantly fewer picks, and significantly more touchdowns. And that is right there going to tell you a little bit
Uh,
about why people are going to be suggesting that Gino's part of the problem. And
oh, certainly part of the problem.
I'm not going to
Now,
disagree with them. I don't think he's the
yeah.
biggest part of the problem.
Well, let's talk
I
about the
think
biggest part of the problem.
okay. So we haven't talked about Ryan Greb yet today. So, um,
Yeah, we have a lot to talk about. I mean, we can. It really depends on which direction you want to go with this show because there's a lot of directions, and I think Ryan Grubb needs to be part of this conversation. And part of the conversation for me was looking back on this year. Now we're not done with the year, but we might as well be. And so it's kind of nice to kind of be able to just have these conversations at least initially to kind of set up the rest of the off season because what decisions were made during the season that led to this time. And you can talk about the coaching staff, you can talk about free agency and how that bombed really if you take a look at it, and we will. The draft picks that worked, that didn't work, the in-season moves and all that kind of stuff. But when you talk about whether or not the offensive coordinator worked, Ryan Grubb, in this situation, with all the combinations that you can talk about as far as personnel and whatnot, it didn't. It just didn't work for whatever reason. Whether he needs another year or not, that's a debate for maybe another moment. But in this season with this roster, it didn't work. And I would love to just hear your opinion on why.
um, why? It to me, it's just a matter of um, a guy who has had success doing a certain thing and um, hasn't recognized that the NFL is a different beast, and you have to call plays differently, and you have to do your coordinate the offense differently than you do in college. It just doesn't work for
And
you to drop
scout
back and throw.
and scouting other teams is part of a big,
Yeah,
huge part of this job,
yeah, and
which he has
just
no
the
experience with whatsoever.
are you're saying so he doesn't have any experience scouting teams from
He doesn't have
college?
any experience scouting NFL teams.
Yes.
Like there was
Um,
nobody on this staff on the offensive side of the ball that you could point to that had experience coaching and scouting NFL teams,
yeah.
getting
I mean,
ready for each Sunday.
this is where you're going to hope that a guy like Leslie Frazier, who, yes, he's a defensive mind, but he's still a guy that's been
Yeah.
around the league forever and has been a head coach, um, can step in and lead the meetings. And even if he's not contributing because he's a defensive mind, he's at least helping and that kind of stuff. And actually, as a defensive mind, he could be pointing out, hey, this is what they're doing, and this is, you know, um, the weaknesses of what they're doing because he's a defensive coach. He should be able to help out with that. So that those are the kinds of things that you'd like to hope that he would be able to you know to do. I look at what Ryan Grubb has done, his body of work over the 16 games so far this year, and he has made good in-game adjustments. And that has been the one positive that we've seen. But his game planning early in the week has been atrocious. Um, his play calling during the games, especially early in games, has been awful. Just a lot of
Scripted plays.
his scripted plays, and then even after the scripted plays, like it isn't. They'll figure out some stuff that will work, but it's never sustainable because it's all passing. There's no running game. There's no balance. There's no play action. Um, Never being able to figure out what works that includes running the ball. Um,
At what
and
point do you attribute? I have to ask this question. At what point do you attribute Geno Smith's worst year, or not worst year, but statistically that the interceptions touchdown ratio kind of mirrored his rookie season, second year season in the NFL? Um, at what point and at what percentage do you attribute the play calling and the coordination of the offense a little bit to the coaching because of that so much discrepancy between the run pass ratios and so forth, which is a killer to quarterbacks in this league. I mean, if teams know you're passing and stuff, and you got to pass to get back into games, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it's extremely hard. It's much more difficult to do that in the NFL. I thought Gino really did well for the circumstances he was put in, to be honest. Now, you can say what you want about the interceptions and so forth and so on, but I believe that some of those can be attributed to the idea that teams know that Gino's going to have to throw the ball, and it's just one of those things where he's having to put the team in a position where they're behind by 2 scores or whatever, and he's going to make decisions that are probably not the best decisions in the moment, but he's really trying to scratch his way back in. I don't know.
yeah, I mean, honestly, that's part of the reason why I am not going to say that the team absolutely has to find a way to move on from Gino. I think you can win with him. I think you give him an offense that's coordinated better, and you give him a running game and a little bit of blocking and those kind of things over the course of a season, not just a little bit here and a little there, but um, actually have a competent offense around him. I think he's going to play significantly better and do just better things. I think that there's a lot to look at for with all of that, and recognize that he can do those things. Opting
Can
out.
Ryan Grubb be salvaged, and would you want him to be salvaged for an additional season? Is there any scenario where you would be, yeah, I can see that. I can go with that, with him coming back.
Um, God, that's hard to throw out and say, God, I would be okay with it. I honestly don't. It for me, no. Um, I think you have to move on as a team, and just to go find a someone who, like, a proven commodity, someone can get the job done. Because yeah, I mean, it's just the track record is that it's not going to happen, and it's entirely his doing. I don't see mitigating circumstances that were like, well, we can't really judge him because, like, he's got a quarterback, which is the biggest thing, right? It's hard to judge an offensive coordinator when their quarterback is crap. Um, he's got a quarterback, so that's not the thing. Um, he's got 2 running backs. He's got uh, 2 really good wide receivers and a savvy vet as a third. He's got a pair of tight ends that you can build around. Um, the weapons are there. Um, I just don't see what circumstances are we looking at. They're like, oh, well, that's the reason why Grubb failed, not himself. you could say the offensive line, but I don't, I didn't see any attempts to do things that's going to make the offensive line um, problem less of an issue. Uh,
So, okay.
Specifically
So
running the ball and doing play action. He did the opposite of what you could have done to help the offensive line. He hurt the offensive line by making them pass block on every play. So, um, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of struggles there that need to be
with that said
concerned.
about Grubb, often you immediately tie in Scott Huff, the offensive line coach,
Yeah.
into Grubb. What
See that
you
is a
have a
problem.
mixed you have a but you have a mixed bag of good and bad with Scott Huff. And some of the
Where's
circumstances
the
were
good?
difficult for him.
Wait. With Huff, where's the good?
The good would be
Lu-
you were handed a really tough situation this year, uh, and you did okay, and you developed a couple of players along the way that maybe even ahead of schedule.
One,
Um, One,
you
you got Olawatimi staying in the game and being ready to play, through all of that kind of stuff. The way that they handled, I thought the offensive line battles throughout the year was kind of iffy for me. The
was a
Christian
disaster.
Haynes back and forth and the
Yeah.
all that kind of
Yep.
stuff. But Lumea coming out of this with somewhat a competency there was a nice surprise. I think you could
Yeah.
maybe attribute some of that to Scott Huff. However,
I don't
and
know.
then the circumstances around Connor Williams retiring early, that's a tough thing to have to kind of mitigate.
Well,
And then
here's
having
the way I
Tomlinson over on the left guard spot, you didn't have really control over that. Obviously, you're going to start him, but as your best option, it's tough. I mean, but that's not a personnel decision. Having George Fant go down early, only playing 2 games this season, and then the rest of the time an injured reserve doesn't help him a lot. Pharaoh Brown's going to be your blocking tight end, but turns out he's not really a great blocker. He's got a 47.8 grade pass blocking and a 54 grade run blocking. Um, you know, you got to play with the hand you're dealt, and he wasn't dealt a very good hand as far as an offensive line.
here's the problem I have with all of that line of thinking. One, he is the running game coordinator for one of probably the worst running game in the NFL. Um, you've got the whole situation with, he had Oluwatimi from day one and decided that he wasn't ready. So the team went and got Connor Williams to try and fix that problem, which that never really worked. And now he's playing Oluwatimi anyway, and it hasn't been worse than with Connor Williams. That shows me like, okay, they didn't evaluate Oluwatimi all that well. Um, you have the whole Christian Haynes situation where they've just yanked him around, and uh, you can't tell me that his problems aren't associated with his coach. Because until we know otherwise, you have to assume that the problems are basically that he's just getting his confidence shattered by his coach, and that's what's causing him to have problems. So there's no development from him. Yeah, Lumea showed up and did um, and has done okay, but it took quite a while before he got on the field. They kept running Bradford out there, who was terrible. Um, they got less out of Charles Cross than the previous coaching staff did. Um, where's the other than Lumea being decent, not great, not good, decent. Other than that, where's the success along the offensive line?
I would like to think that the Charles Cross thing could be somewhat mitigated by having Lincoln Tomlinson next to you, instead of the guy we had last year. um,
Okay,
other than that, you're right. Now I'm asking these questions not because I'm trying to stick up for Scott Huff. I'm asking these questions because I wanted a final definitive answer as to far as how and when we move on from these guys. Because I do believe that you can't objectively look at the results of this offensive line and of the offense in general, offensive coordinator, and say that they did a good enough job to be invited back. Um,
Mm-mm.
there's just no way. And so I was kind of trying to line that up for you to take an easy putt, for example. But I totally agree with you, like 100%. It's just not good enough, and we need better. And it's kind of an optimistic thing for me because as bad as it was, there's so much room for improvement. And you combine what we did as far as the end result on our defense with an improving offense next year. I think this team can be formidable. You end the season maybe on a win next week. You're at 10 wins. You've got a decent roster, a core to build around. You sign a couple of key players. You take a look at your salary cap, which we can do here in a little bit, and say that we can generate a bunch of stuff to go out and pretty much do whatever we need to do to get this team ready to go next year, which is exciting to me. And one of those things is going to be a new offensive coordinator by, the first couple weeks of February, because I think it's going to be done.
Yeah, I think that you look at they've got to, and I wouldn't say first couple weeks of February. They need to
Unless
the
they want a
season.
Super Bowl coach. You know what I mean?
Okay, so they're going to look at an offensive line coach from the Super Bowl and use them as a
I don't know.
coordinator. Like, I
I don't
mean,
know. I don't know who they're going to look at. I'm just saying there's a certain amount of playoff teams that you may want to coach from. That's all.
okay.
And those
I,
decisions are going to wait until, around the 1st of February.
yeah, I mean, I would say you've got next week the season ends and um, 18 out of 32 teams, their coaches become available. The following week, 8 more join them. So 2 weeks from now is when I think um, you have to have it figured out and have um, your coaches in place. Because one of the issues that they had this year was because they took a long time getting um, McDonald hired, which was the right hire. I that's fine. But between that and then trying to get his coaches in place, that basically what you ended up with was, um,
Ryan Grubb.
you waited and waited and waited, and what was
Right.
left? What was left was Ryan Grubb, and that is part of what's going on here. Like, I think you have to examine that you've got a situation where your team um, is they need to go find another option. They need to go, and you can't wait um, because part of it is that you got to be able to get your new coaches in, and you've got to get them um, working with the scouting department and evaluating draft picks and free agents, so that way you've got everything set up, lined up, so that way you have evaluations that are based on the needs of the scheme, not just generic ones, because um, that takes time. It takes time to get those things together and aligned. And so you can't. I don't want to see them wait until mid-February again. Uh, get it done. You know,
As soon as
get it
possible. Yeah.
done mid-January. Give yourself another month to get so that way you're better prepared for the free agency and the draft, because free agency started last year and the Seahawks didn't have all of their coaches in place.
Yeah.
Which is part of the problem. It's part of the problem this year was they didn't even have their coaches in place, and yet Schneider's trying to bring players in, but we don't have the coaches to help figure out which players need to be brought in, which is part of their job. So, yeah, I mean, there is a struggle there. So, it's worth looking into.
So, I've got a question for you as far as direction of this show. So, we can continue to talk if you'd like, but I would say the next conversations that we need to have, either on this show or another show, would be kind of evaluating free agency from last year and the draft picks and how that kind of formed the team, how those players or play will impact what we do this off season. So that's kind of a
Hmm.
conversation. The conversation around the salary cap, reviewing, 2024, how it goes into 2025. I will just say we're currently $7 million underwater. That will be resolved. Nobody needs to panic on that.
Oh, they're
Everyone's
getting salary cap room this offseason actually isn't that hard. You
no,
got a bunch of guys that are on big contracts that didn't pull their weight, that can be easily let go, and a couple of other big contracts that can be reworked, including Geno Smith. If you want to
correct.
add a year or 2 years onto it, you can drop his cap number down to half what it currently is, and um,
Yeah, I think you can get to, 65 million conservatively,
yeah,
to be able to spend. And if you were going to be really aggressive, you could get up to 100 million.
ugh,
And
that
so
would
you can pretty much
that
have
would
as
be
much
hard.
money. Well, with
That
that,
would,
with Gino, I'm just saying with Gino in the equation, you could get a
oh, that's true
situation where you
because
could be,
if they move on from Geno, that's like that's a lot right there. You can just
that's
yeah.
$25 million cap savings just off the
Hmm.
bat. So, but I don't want to get too far ahead in that unless we're going to really go into this
No,
conversation.
that's a whole show and
That
more
is
than we
a
have time
very
for
much
here.
a whole show, but it is part of kind of evaluating, the off season. I think that's an early conversation. We're probably not there yet. We've still got we're in season. We've got a game to go. But I just wanted to put that out there as far as, we will be talking about that. It is going to be important. It's going to be a hot topic as soon as the season ends. Like people are going to want to know, how are we going to improve this team? And one of the big ways to do it is the free agency. Now, I'm not as big of a free agency fan as some, and I would much rather put my resources and conversation into the draft.
Well, let's
Um,
actually look at because the Seahawks were fairly big players in the free agency this last
yeah,
offseason. And if we look at that, um, what you're going to see is why you and I are both very skeptical of using free
yeah,
agency as a way to
yeah.
improve the
It's tough.
team
Yeah,
because
it's
you
it's
have
tough.
well let's look at the free agent acquisitions, right?
Well, let me
Um,
hold on. Let me ask you this: Are you more of, this is a philosophical question? Are you more of a proponent of finding key players and paying big for key positions, or are you a fan of paying middle middle wages, basically, across the larger spectrum of players, as far as how you build roster construction?
well, okay, so I looked at this extensively. And I know the numbers are all different now because of the salary cap has grown so much. But basically, if you try and invest, let's say you invest really heavily into a few elite players, like your quarterback and a
Left
defensive
tackle,
tackle and a
etc.
cornerback,
Right, right,
and
right.
and then try and go middle of the road across the board, you don't have enough Pro Bowlers, you don't have enough stars to win in this league consistently. But at the same time, if you overload on the stars, let's say you get like 9 or 10 like legit high paid elite Pro Bowlers, you're going to win a bunch, but your
You
lack
can't
of
sustain
depth and the lack of
success.
supporting, it's hard. Yeah, it's hard to sustain. So there's a middle ground in there where you have 6 or 7 of the elite players that are really high end cost, and then distribute everything else, relatively equally across the board. Um, that is where you find the contenders, the Super Bowl teams, because you have enough star power to power you through and win you games when things you're struggling, guys that can take over games, but you also have the depth and have the um, general talent at other positions to um, continue to have success. And also, if you really invest heavily in just a few players, and one of them gets hurt, that's such a huge blow to your chance of
And
contending.
you've got to stack a couple of drafts. I mean,
Yeah.
you really do.
Well,
It goes all together, but
yeah, because stacking the drafts means hopefully you've got good players, but they're playing on rookie contracts.
exactly.
Um, and so that's really where it comes down to. I think building through the draft is the way to go. It's the other half of this conversation. I don't believe in going out and spending huge money in free agency and being like,
Okay,
oh,
so
let's go spend a lot of money on this guy. Um, in part because there's a reason why his former team is letting him go and letting him walk.
so okay, so I wanted to have that brief conversation before we talked about our free agent spends in 2024 because I think it really you can either have a pretty decent indictment of John Schneider, or you can understand what John was trying to start. The tackle move for Leonard Williams, re-signing Leonard Williams to a 3-year, $63 million deal was the right move to do because
Yeah,
Leonard Williams was a proven commodity and still a young player. And while they probably didn't anticipate the year he did have, which was close to his pinnacle,
it's the best year of his career.
he played pretty darn well given the fact that we re-signed him. And Seattle hasn't had a lot of success doing that. You can just go to Draymond Jones as the latest example of when you hire somebody in at a high rate, sometimes it doesn't
Mm.
work out. All right, so
Yeah,
Leonard
Drake.
Williams, what did you think of that?
Well, Leonard Williams. I mean, that was the right move and the best move, um, because he has solidified and anchored a defensive line that has been a massive liability in the last few years, and now it's
Bingo,
starting to look like a strength. Um,
bingo.
and so that was a great move. You have to I like the fact that it was someone that they knew who they had. They knew everything about him because he'd been with the team for a year. Um,
Yes,
and they're going to go and s- spend the money to re-sign a guy when you know what you have.
and they're
And
going to
so
do the exact same thing with Ernest Jones
and
this
they
offseason.
should, and they should,
Yes,
because he was a difference maker. Um, the alternative to doing that would be Dre Jones, where you spend big money on a guy you don't know that well, um, and then it doesn't work out. And so they've just been spending a lot of money on him for 2 seasons to get very little out of him.
his
And
cap hit next year is $25.6 million.
his cap hit next year is going to be whatever the dead money was left on that contract,
$14
because he
million.
won't, which he will not be playing in Seattle. He will be gone.
By
He's
the
one.
way, in case anybody's interested, we after the last game, we will have offloaded all of our dead money, save like $250,000. So we will
Yeah.
have a clean slate next offseason as far as dead money is concerned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because all of the this season was a year where they were unloading, the bad
Jamal Adams,
contracts.
etc.
Jamal Adams, and yeah, there are some
Andre
really
Diggs.
bad contracts they had to get out from underneath. And so there's a lot of dead money sitting there that they couldn't invest on this year's team. Um, and that led to some of the moves that John Snyder made this
It
offseason.
it exactly did. Yes. So
So
Rayshon Jenkins, 2 year, $12 million contract, didn't work out. I think as good as they hoped, but you're going to give that like a C grade, for
well,
example.
I mean,
Lost his job halfway through the season to Kobe Bryant as well,
he
which
did,
is
but he lost
actually
it he lost it partly because of injury. And Kobe Bryant ascended and became a significantly better player than he's
yes.
ever been. So
But I'd rather
okay,
pay Rayshon Jenkins $6 million a year than Jamal Adams $22 million a year.
Oh, hell yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Jenkins at $6 million a year is a better player than Jamal Adams was, regardless of
And
the
Jamal
salary.
Adams got hurt again and was on IR this year again as well
Yeah.
after he came back.
Um,
Re-signing Noah Fant, 2-year, $20 million deal.
See that? I understand why they did it. They were couldn't go with no tight ends. Sorry. They let Will Disney walk. They let Colby Parkinson walk. They had to re-sign one of them. He's the most dynamic pass catcher of the group. I understand it.
He did
Sure,
end up with 43 catches and 437 yards, but no touchdowns.
yeah. I think in the end, what we found was that they've got a rookie there which can do that job, and they can move on from him if they want to, and free up some cap room.
So if Noah Fant's cut, they save $9 million and they
Mm-hmm.
dead cap $4.5 million.
Yeah.
Now, they could restructure. There's an opportunity here to restructure this sort of contract and get a lower cap hit for 2025 if they want to do that for whatever reason.
Yeah. So
Because
that's a possibility too.
getting a guy that catches 43 times for 437 yards is no small thing. It's just not worth $10 million.
Especially for a guy who's not great as a blocker too.
Pharaoh Brown, they paid 1 year, $3.2 million contract, 8 catches, 65 yards.
That was a waste of money.
And he wasn't hired to do that either. But he was hired to block. And like I said before, he had a pass blocking grade of 47.8 on the year, run blocking grade of 54.9 on the year.
Yeah, so he's an average run blocker and below average pass blocker. He's not a good blocker. It wasn't this year. And he was brought in to do that. But he's been a backup his entire career. I think the $3 million was far too much for a backup tight end, who was not going to play much. Again, they did it because they only had one tight end on the roster at that time, and that was Fant, who can't block. And they hadn't gotten to the draft, and this was a draft hedge. This was get a guy in the roster, because if the draft gets away from you in terms of tight end and you don't get one, you have to have someone. And so, okay. It was a little much. If they could have done that for, 1.5, 1.75, okay, that's probably better. But whatever. I mean, that's one of those things where it's a 1-year deal. He's gone, and you move on.
George Fant, 2-year contract, played in 2 games this season.
That one's frustrating because they brought him in for a specific reason, and that was to be the guy that bridges them until Abe Lucas gets back. And he got hurt, and injuries suck. And to be like, oh, well, he played in 2 games. Well, it's not like he was available and bad, and therefore it was a healthy scratch. Like, he got hurt. And that just didn't work out. The 2-year deal part of it is the part that is a little frustrating, because he's not a part of your long-term future. He was either going to bridge until Abe Lucas got back, or if Abe Lucas didn't come back, if his knee is shot and he's not going to play again, then you're going to be replacing him.
Next year he's got a $5.6 million cap hit. He's got a 3.8 million in savings if we cut him, 1.85 on the dead cap if he's gone. I would imagine they'll probably figure out a better solution at that spot, but if they don't, he's probably on the roster until after the draft.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is if they're going to keep him that long, they might as well keep him into June, because then you can spread that dead cap out a little bit and give yourself some more flexibility. Yeah, he's the kind of guy that, 5 million's not 5.5 isn't bad for a swing tackle that can play both positions. It's a little much, But he's better than Forsyth, and they don't have anyone else unless you expect
Right.
Michael Gerald to take a massive jump between year 1 and year 2, which is possible. He's got the measurables, the athleticism to do it, and so
They could
that's a
take some of that
possibility.
$4 million in savings though, and put it into another player.
Yeah, you could take say you spend $2 million on a different uh, swing tackle, and then take the other two and use it as elsewhere on the roster where you need it. So
Okay. Couple of linebackers that we signed: Terrell Dodson, Jerome Baker, both 1 year contracts. Dodson was for a little over the league minimum, 1.4. Jerome Baker was a 1 year, $7 million deal. Ultimately, Tyrell Dodson was waived in mid-November. Jerome Baker was traded to the. This could end up being a good free agency pickup just for this trade. Traded to
mm-hmm.
the Tennessee Titans plus a 4th round pick for Ernest Jones the fourth.
So Dodson, because of the low cost, actually wasn't um, a bad like signing. He
And he led
struggled.
Pro Football Focus the prior year in grade for the position, albeit a small sample size of 9 games.
And part of why I think looking at Pro Football Focus is somewhat of a waste of time. Um, in the end, as of right now, Tyrell Dodson still has played the most defensive snaps of any of Seattle's linebackers. And he hasn't been on the team since week 9.
Interesting.
Ernest Jones will pass him in the next game because he's only 3 behind. But Tyrese Knight is over 100 behind. So Dodson's almost certainly going to be second on the team in snaps. And they got that for 1.4 million for the year, but by cutting him when they did, half of that they don't pay him. And so to me that's a successful pickup because they needed a bridge. They needed someone to come in and hold down the spot while they um,
And they took a flyer.
yeah.
You take flyers on the NFL, and I thought that was, given given the information that John Schneider operated under at the
Mm-hmm.
time, I thought it was an okay deal.
And the complete lack of uh, cap room at the time. Now they drafted Tyrese Knight, and his development made Dodson expendable, so they went
And
ahead
Baker expendable, yes.
and did that. And Knight's been great.
My only
Um,
question was the evaluation to begin with of what does Mike McDonald need as far as linebacker on this team. And they ultimately made the trade for Ernest Jones, who's a completely different type of linebacker than Dodson and Baker.
yeah.
So, how do you evaluate that part of it?
Well, I look at it as they got the guys that were available. Um, the
Well, we
big
had our own player available that was similar to Ernest Jones
yes and no. Um,
that could have been
Brook
resigned.
Brooks could have been re-signed, and he is a better player than Baker or Dodson. The contract, though, that he got from Miami was prohibitive, and that's why they kind of did that. But they
What
also
kind of a contract do you think Ernest Jones is going to get?
Ernest Jones is going to get a much bigger deal, but Jones is worth a much bigger deal. He's a better player. He's significantly better in coverage. Um,
That's true.
and so he's a significantly better player. And so he um, is going to get more and should get more. It was more of there was a timing issue where he got signed really early in the off season, and the Seahawks were still working on Williams. And
Right.
so, okay, so they signed Baker. He was supposed to
And
be the guy that
Brooks
was going to,
wasn't going to give him an opportunity to make an offer,
yeah,
basically
they weren't going to wait. He wasn't going to wait around.
matching offer.
Yeah,
Right.
he wasn't going to wait around for it. So okay, that happened. Baker was supposed to be the guy that was supposed to anchor the defense for a year, and that didn't happen. He played only 223 snaps this year. Played in 4 games. Because he played in 5, but the first one he got hurt like on the opening kickoff. So, but he played in 4 games this year and was clearly not the answer. And so the team moved on from him, and they did so in a way that freed up freed up a whole bunch of his salary and got them Ernest Jones, who's a special player.
Yeah.
And so they need to go pay for
I
that. So
love that. I love that move. I mean, that in-season move by John Schneider is one of his best.
yeah, it is. And so to go ahead and the 2 linebackers, they were both on 1-year deals, right? John Snyder's getting blasted out there on Twitter and other places because he signed these 2 guys to be the middle linebackers and it was a failure. They were both on 1-year deals for a reason. He knew they weren't the guys. They were there because you have to field a team. And the guys that he wanted weren't available. He
And you're
drafted
looking for a
one.
long-term guy. You take a flyer now. That might not have been Jerome Baker, but you're trying to see if Terrell Dodson has anything that you can kind of hold on to, and it just didn't work out. The deal is, you're trying to get a guy that really is Mike McDonald's guy, and
Yeah.
you got the Dodson thing and the Baker thing kind of when they were kind of figuring it all out. Like you said earlier, they got a late start on that stuff. The Ernest Jones guy, I'm sure had a lot of input from McDonald. Like, this is the guy, this is who we identify that we'd like to
Yes.
have. And after that trade happened, you heard Mike McDonald say, he's a special guy. This is the kind of guy, a kind of player we want in our defense.
Yeah.
And we hope he's here for a very long time. And that's all you need to know about what they plan to do with Ernest Jones in the offseason.
And then he came in and did everything that you asked of him.
Yes. And the defense
And
went 180.
and then some. And so between him and Tyrese Knight, you've got the guys that you can
Your
build
future.
around.
Exactly. Okay.
And Dodson and Baker got you to the other 2. Knight needed a chance to develop, and Jones wasn't on the team. And yes, he got traded in the previous offseason. So you think, oh, maybe they could have gone. The Rams were not going to trade him to Seattle. And so as a team, you were waiting for him to become available from Tennessee. And when he did, they went and got him.
Yeah. It was interesting because this team cut 4 players mid-season that and it's hard to do that in season. So I got to give John Schneider credit and Mike McDonald. It's like they're not holding on to these guys and just saying, well, this is what we got. We're going to not try. Schneider's out there trying to make the deals all the time. And moving on from Baker and Dodson, then D. Williams and Chenault after their fiasco against the Jets game, it really is kind of a hard thing to do in the NFL. And they were,
The thing is, D. Williams, it wasn't a fiasco in the Jets game. It was a fiasco for like 9 weeks before they finally, they stuck with him for way too long.
Yeah. Well,
So,
you never know what's going on in the background in practices and all that stuff. And they may have seen some play out of him at either offensive wide receiver or defensive back that they were intrigued on. Okay. So they signed Tremaine Ankrum at offensive guard. He was released in July. No surprise there, really. Laken Tomlinson is the other signing. Now, yeah, they did sign him for $1.2 million, but they got $1.2 million worth of play out of him as well.
Well, I mean, that's the thing is you match contract to production. And as a team, they needed bodies on the line. He was a body. And
he was a draft hedge, I believe.
He was a draft hedge, and then the draft they didn't get a starter. They thought they had in hand, but he turned out not to be for whatever reason. But yeah, they didn't get a starter right away. So they had Tomlinson there to be a guy,
and
body.
started every snap. Like left guard. Well, save a couple.
Save a few.
Um,
Yeah, Haynes was in there for I think 12 snaps in one game. Other than that, Tomlinson was there. Um,
and there's a
and
lot of value in that. I mean, there is, and I don't want to
there
dish on
is.
him too. I don't want to dish on him too much because there's value to a player being available and playing. But
Mm-hmm.
if you do it at the 48th best guard ranking in the NFL, then you're just skating by, really. And
Yeah,
it's a 1 year hold, just a placeholder in order to
yeah.
get to the next spot,
And that's
basically.
the thing is he was a placeholder, but it was a 1 year deal, so they're not bound to him. And also, given his salary, right? They got 1.2 million out of quality out of him. I think it was one of those deals. They needed a guy. They needed someone. They needed bodies. They had nothing, and they got value given the size of the contract.
Okay. I'm going to run through just the rest of the list really quick, and we kind of skate through these. I want to get to one person though. Jonathan Hankins signed a 1 year contract. He kind of played okay at the beginning and lost reps over time, which is actually a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Safety Kayvon Wallace signed a 1 year contract. He was somewhat ineffective, 100% completion percentage against him, and when he did play, and got hurt a little bit. Eventually worked off of the rotation. And we talked about Laviska Chenault, signed a 1 year deal,
Ugh.
waived
Yeah.
after the Jets game. And then Connor Williams. Connor Williams was a very late signing, signed a 1 year deal, ended up retiring midseason.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that you can blame those things on any of those signings um, on John Schneider. He did what he needed to do. I think the Jonathan Hankins thing was a hedge, but also he knew his defensive line coach from the Cowboys. That was, so that's kind of a character signing, if you will. He's a known commodity. He's going to come in and he does what he does. He's just an eating space kind of a guy. And then the rest of the guys just didn't work out. What do you think about the Connor Williams deal and how that worked out?
Honestly, that one's frustrating in that this is a guy that was coming off a couple Pro Bowl seasons, and so yeah, he had that torn ACL and he was getting himself healthy, and so he wasn't able to sign earlier. And they're like, okay, let's go. We're gonna bring him in. He's the one guy out there that's available to fix a problem. It Except for that, he never returned to the form um, that he had before, and then retires mid-season, which there's something weird there. Um, Whether the knee was worse than he basically was like, it's not going to get better, so I'm done, or there was like, I'm
A
done playing
coaching
for this.
staff conflict. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm done playing for this coach. Um, and or there was something there that led to that, and because you don't battle back and go through the rehab to get back from an ACL and
And quit on your team halfway. There's
get onto the field and go through all of that work to just be like, yeah, never mind. Um, and so something was weird there. To me, what I look at with that is that that's a Huff problem. Um, in that you had a guy who played at a much higher level in the past, and you weren't able to get anything close to that out of him um, this year. But you went and signed him because you believe that the guy you had wasn't good enough. And but yet Oluwatimi gets in there for the second half of the year and certainly isn't a downgrade over
yeah.
Connor Williams. It's not really an upgrade, but
Well, we
at
never
least
talked about him. Like,
at least the
how
snaps
many
didn't go
times
up
did
over
we
his
talk
head.
about Oluwatimi after he was inserted into the starting lineup in a
Not
negative
much.
way?
No.
Not much at all.
I mean, the only time we really talked about Connor Williams was when the snaps went over people's head. Um,
Which was like
but
three or
and
four times. Yeah.
yeah, which didn't happen with Oluwatimi, which is kind of nice. But he wasn't. Oluwatimi was never particularly effective as a pass blocker or a run blocker. Um, and
Yep.
but it's not like Connor Williams was either. So, I mean, I just look at that. That move felt like a desperation move. Like, wow, our offensive line's terrible. Let's go get this guy. Without, and then they didn't get much out of him, which that's partly going to be physical, but it's also partly not. One of the things that really bothered me as the season just progressed the whole year was how poor Seattle's offensive linemen were at sustaining blocks, especially in the running game. They could get up onto someone and engage them and then promptly lose leverage and have the person shed the block and go make a tackle. That screams like a technique issue. The fact that it was constant all year by almost all the guys. And I really wonder what Huff was teaching, because there was a lot of that as far as struggles. Just a simple thing. You're once you latch onto a guy, just maintaining your block, and they just couldn't do it. And to me, that's it's problematic. So,
And
but
strength
yeah,
and conditioning as well too.
yeah,
Um,
it's more technique to me. But okay, if you want to go with that it's a strength issue, but still, um, I don't know. Lakin
so the
Tomlinson's
last
never had strength problems.
the last move that kind of falls into everything we've just been talking about was Seattle traded a 2026 sixth round pick for defensive tackle Roy Robertson Harris a couple weeks prior to the trade deadline. That really didn't really affect too much in the end.
No, it didn't.
And
It was also essentially a no cost
right,
move. I mean, at the time they had a rash of injuries on the defensive line, and so they traded for a body, someone that they could use in the rotation, because they weren't getting anything out of Mike Morris or Miles Adams. Those guys kind of showed that they didn't belong, and so they needed a body that they could put in the rotation. And they came in and played 27, 29, and 26 snaps before the bye, and then people started to get healthy, and his snap count decreased after that from 19 in week 11 down to 4 in week 17. But he was always a rotational guy.
right. And a one
And
year deal, even though he was under contract for a couple of years. In fact, he's got a $6.6 million cap hit next year.
he won't
But
play under that.
100% of that is cap savings if he's cut. So he has
Yeah.
zero dead cap space. So he will not be back, I would assume.
He will not be back on that cut. They might cut him and then re-sign him to a completely different deal. Um,
Correct.
Something along the lines of around the league minimum to a million and a half, somewhere in that range. But and that's what you're getting at. He's a rotational defensive tackle, not a starter, not a guy that you want to invest a lot into.
So that's kind of the conversation about the offseason. Just quickly, like what kind of a grade, all things considered, would you give John Schneider as a general manager of this ball club in 2024, which was an important year for him? It was a transition year for him as well.
Honestly, I'd give him like a B or a B plus. He got McDonald, which was the A plus coaching hire. Um, filled in a bunch of holes, and um, was in a situation where they didn't have a tremendous amount of draft capital or salary cap room. So they did a lot of 1 year deals and filled holes and that kind of stuff, because they were in that spot. Um, but managed to get, Byron Murphy and Lumea, and get through this year of dead cap purgatory, and get them, moving forward. So I think it was overall a pretty good year. I like the fact that you look at those signings. Those signings are, some of them didn't work out, but he's not tied to them because they were 1 year deals. And so now those guys are gone, and you can reset and have the team in a better position. So overall, I think he did pretty well.
Yeah. Interesting. What are the biggest things they need to address this year? Just quickly, and then we can get out of here.
You've got to go get a competent offensive line. I still think you need a center, and I still think you need a left guard. And you have to basically kind of restock the depth, because a lot of those guys that we were talking about were on 1-year deals, and so they're all going to be gone. And so you need to find a way to get some cap room, use your draft picks, and restock the depth of the team, because you've got a nice foundation, you've got a nice core, but there's work to do on that second layer, in order to make this a winning team.
I would even be okay having Oluwatimi come back and be your starting center, as long as you've got some competition there, and it could be a middle round draft pick as far as I'm concerned. The big thing for me would be a starting caliber left guard.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to me to be the biggest acquisition they can make in the offseason, whether they do that in free agency or it's our first pick overall in the draft. That remains to be seen, but
Yep.
that to me is the big one. Okay. Gosh, we have so much to talk about this offseason. It's gonna be a lot of fun. Season's not over. We got one more game. We'll come back and preview that, and we'll lead into all these other conversations. I mean, we talk about Geno Smith. I think that's a big conversation. We're talking about the top 2 wide receivers on this team with big contracts, and DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Decisions will need to be made there. Decisions will need to be made with Noah Fant, possibly Draymond Jones, Uchenna Nwasu has a contract that probably will need to be reworked. Do you extend Charles Cross, for example, if you're going to restructure and change contracts? Does that conversation happen this offseason? He's kind of eligible to take a look at that.
He is,
in
but
the
they've
final
also
year
got
of his rookie deal.
They've also got the 5th-year option on him the year after. So I envision them sitting on that that decision until a year from now, and being like, okay, so here's your 5th-year option at whatever it ends up being at the time. It's probably going to be around $15 million a year, and then using that as kind of the baseline and getting him signed long term.
Yeah.
So
yeah, because he's still 25 years old too. Young guy. All right, let's get out of here. Great conversation, Keith. Thank you so much. It's been a great season so far. Got one more game. Let's enjoy that and have a great off season. So you can find Keith on Myers NFL on Blue Sky. I'm on Blue Sky as well. NW Seahawk. The show is Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Find us on your favorite podcast platform. Our YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button, share it, like it, and give us a comment. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.